The Georgia Bulldogs are going to be going on the road to visit the Ole Miss Rebels in an SEC showdown. Ole Miss is a 2.5 point dog at home. The over under is set at 54.5 in this one, Mason. Uh, this game last year was not particularly close, let's just say. Um, and UGA did kind of run away with things in the fourth quarter and make it look even worse than really what it was in that game. But UGA wins it last year, 52-17, and now we flip flop locations, right? And Georgia's going to have to go on the road with this one, and this is a huge matchup. I mean, there's really just no other way around it. Georgia's already got one loss. And with the way the SEC is shaping up this season, we'll kind of reference the SEC conference standings after we kind of go through the breakdowns of each of these teams here and kind of talk more about the SEC championship race. But Georgia is in it at this point with one loss, obviously, at Alabama. And there's no margin for error as far as that goes. And this is an opportunity for Georgia, one of two opportunities left on their schedule to get a big win here. Georgia's got one big win at Texas, and they're looking for another big one here as Ole Miss has had a really nice season this year. Um, a big part of this game, Mason, in my opinion, is going to boil down to can the Ole Miss defense take advantage of what has been a troubled offense for UGA? Not really just over the last few weeks, but especially over the last few weeks, but really throughout the season. There's been a lot of hiccups in the road, lots of speed bumps in the road, and particularly Carson Beck has been having some issues out there on the football field, and it's been very apparent. 11 interceptions over the last 5 games. It's a point of contention right now amongst Georgia fans, and not really contention. That may be the wrong word, but it's a point of concern, certainly. And this is a big, big matchup, as we said. So let's jump into this thing. We talked about that Georgia offense, and you know, uh, through all the trials and tribulations Georgia has went through this season, there's light to gleam from the offense. So I don't want to sound too doom and gloom here. I mean, 33.1 points per game is okay, and Georgia's actually been able to figure out a way to run the ball. I feel like a little bit better over the last, I'd say three games. Georgia has been able to figure out how to run the ball a little bit better. ETN obviously went out in the Florida game hurt, so his status, I guess, is somewhat up in the air as far as this one goes. I'm assuming he plays, but maybe more on that. But Nate Frazier has been the guy that's kind of stepped up and had 80 something rushing yards in the Florida game last week and looked pretty good, looked pretty explosive in my opinion. This Georgia offensive line, I feel like, has gotten a little bit better over the last few weeks. I would say a little bit to do with that has been getting some guys back healthy at center and things like that. I think you're still kind of waiting on Tate Ratledge's reemergence. A lot of people had him considered to be the best offensive guard in the country this season going into the 2024 season. And if you don't know, he had gotten injured earlier this season and has not been back for several weeks now. So Georgia is kind of waiting on him to make his way back, and I think that'll help even more in the run game. And because it was a really slow start to start the season running the football, and there's been tons of injuries in that running back room. Georgia's really only got a couple of big backs. You got Cash Jones as well that I feel like probably needs to get a little more playing time, especially if ETN is going to be banged up. Expect to see number 32 Cash Jones, but look at the numbers for this offense, man. It's been a pass first offense, right? And Georgia has thrown the ball about 60% of the time this year, and that's just kind of the personnel I feel like the Georgia's got at this point, Mason. I just this isn't a road grading offensive line or anything like that, but they've done a good job protecting Carson Beck for the most part. 10 sacks allowed this year. That's 21st in the country. So for the most part, been able to form him a pocket and let him work. Now, look, let's be real. We talked about Carson Beck's woes. I've said some good things about this offense. So let's get into the bad stuff. There was pockets that Carson Beck had last week that he was getting happy feet and moving around. And 2 of his 3 interceptions last week, his feet were moving when he threw the football, right? And so, Carson this game has got a lot to do with Carson going out there and being able to protect the football. When he does protect the football, when it's not a play that he's throwing to the other team, this guy looks great, Mason. I mean, he does. He's got the arm. He's got, he gets up and down the field. I mean, look at the pass yards per game, 299 per game. That's 12th in the country. Since when do you know Georgia to have a top 15 passing offense? And that's what Georgia has this season. And they've got the wide receivers to match it, even though Georgia has lost a lot of wide receivers. You could point early into the season to some of the mix-ups and route communications and plays and things like that, and that caused a few of the interceptions that Carson has had this year. But make no mistake about it, man, this guy's seeing ghosts. What do you think about the Georgia offense headed into this one? I mean, the most important thing for this team at this point is for Carson Beck to protect the football, and if Carson does that, I trust the offense to be able to get the yardage. I trust them to be able to score the touchdowns. And I think Georgia wins this football game. I think it's plain and simple. But
Yeah.
Carson Beck hasn't showed us that he can do that. And, I'm sure there's a prop bet out there somewhere, folks. But, one interception, I might go over because he seems like he's good for two a game at least right this second. What are your thoughts on this offense and, going into this matchup against Ole Miss?
Yeah, well, this team and this offense will go as Carson Beck goes, and that's just kind of the reality of Georgia's offense right now. They don't have much of a run game. It's gotten a little bit better as of late, and I do expect them to run the ball a little bit more in this football game. But I think Carson honestly is possibly the most influential player in college football right now, and what I mean by that is, if I were to ask you, Mark, if Carson Beck doesn't throw another pick for the remainder of the season, who would win? Who would win the national championship in your eyes?
It's Georgia, and I've said that on the show, Mason. I think the season ends with him throwing a pick and losing the season for Georgia, or it ends in him hoisting a trophy.
Right. So this one player has the ability to lead this team to a national championship, and that's not uncommon to talk about a quarterback in that sort of light. But it's more of a it's more real for that to be the case for Georgia now than it ever has been for a UGA football program, due to the fact that they haven't really had the weapons to go to outside of Carson, who has struggled. I think his confidence is wavering a bit, not having some of those safety valves to go to, and especially if Trevor Etienne's not able to go in this football game. He's sort of been that one elite player that you can count on for the Georgia offense all season. Last game against Florida, the tight ends didn't show up. Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky, according to Pro Football Focus, were the two lowest rated offensive players for Georgia in that football game. So they were not producing to the point where you're seeing Ben Urosek getting more touches and more attention in that football game than we've seen him get all season. Maybe they get him going, but going up against this Ole Miss defense, I'm really concerned for Carson because we know Ole Miss does a great job with their pass rush. Carson has not been good going whenever he's been off balance or had to escape the pocket or anything like that. Carson is completing under 30% of his passes when he's taking pressure, and it's been really bad. He's throwing all of these picks are coming in situations where he's getting hurried or he's getting pressure on him. The pocket is collapsing. So to me, the Georgia offensive line has a tall task in blocking the Ole Miss defensive line up front, giving Carson the opportunity to throw the football. Do they stand up to the task? That's kind of the bigger question to me, because I think if you're giving Carson a pocket to work in where he can get to his third, maybe fourth read, then that's when Carson is elite. That's when you see the first round talent come out. When he hasn't been able to get to that third, by the time he gets to the third, if he's having to shift and get out of the pocket, that's where he's making mistakes. So as much pressure as we're putting on Carson Beck right now, I think that equally the pressure needs to go to this offensive line. And this is the toughest defensive line that they've faced all season. So how do they respond? That's a big question for me.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you know, you said something that kind of reminded me of what I was thinking this week, and I want to see what your thoughts are too. I don't have any science to back this up. I don't have a bunch of stats to back this up, but doesn't it seem like Carson Beck just doesn't have a check down this year? It's like where's the check down running back? And maybe it's because these running backs are having to stay in and help with pass pro. I don't know. I'm asking, and you fans let me know in the comment section. But it seems like in years past, there's always been that safety valve, right? That Georgia quarterbacks have been able to hit, and sometimes to their demise. Sometimes they'd hit that safety valve whenever you felt like they had a wide receiver open. I'm talking Jake Fromm. I'm talking Stetson Bennett. And it's part of running an offense. If you don't have anything, give it to this guy and let him make somebody miss, right? And instead of doing that and putting the ball in the playmaker's hands, you know, uh, he's putting the ball in the other team's hands by trying to force things that are just flat out not there. And at this point, these defenses are sitting back in these zone coverages and disguising these zone coverages as man. There was multiple situations where Florida did a really good job last week of disguising their coverages, looking like they were in a man coverage, and then dropping back into a zone. And Carson panicked. You could see it. You could see it in his feet. And honestly, Mason, the mental fortitude that I felt like was missing in this one. Carson. I compared it, and it reminded me of what we saw Stetson Bennett go through in 2021. And there was an emotional outburst from Stetson Bennett in 2021 whenever he finally got over the hump and Georgia was able to, win a national championship. And I mean, you literally saw the man go to tears on the sideline and be held by other grown men on the team there. Um, I think it just goes to show the amount of pressure that these guys are under. The amount of pressure that it is to play quarterback at the University of Georgia is absolutely immense. And Carson doesn't seem to be in the best frame of mind right now. And I guess is kind of my point in all this. And I feel like we saw Stetson go through this at Georgia, and then we saw Stetson kind of break out the other end of it. Um, so I hope that that's the ending that we're going to see for Carson Beck, because I feel like the guy has tried to be as even keel as possible, but his emotions are starting to show on his sleeve. Whenever he's making some of these bad decisions, he's going straight to the sideline, sitting on the bench, throwing his head back. And Mason, that's just not being a leader, I get it. I'm as competitive as anyone, and I get pissed off when I mess up, and a lot of us do, but you got to be a professional, man. I mean, this kid's driving a Lamborghini to work every day. Let's act like you've been there before, and you need to be going and patting your teammates on the butt and saying "my bad" and let's go. We're gonna go get it. And instead, I feel like this guy's on the sideline, kind of feeling sorry for himself, and there's really no time or place for that during that 60 minutes. So I really wish that they would get that addressed, and get that fixed. And I know that Kirby is, that's something that Kirby's working on. And it's really funny if you listen to Kirby Smart in his post game press conferences. And I heard somebody else say this, so I won't take credit for it, but I thought it was a good point. The worse you play at Georgia, the better Kirby Smart talks about you in the post game press conference. The better you play at Georgia, the worse Kirby talks about you. In 2021 and 2022, Kirby Smart would show up in press conferences and talk about how bad the defense played at practice today. You know what I'm saying? And we have a Carson Beck situation where he's not playing well, and Kirby's talking about how he loves how Carson gets us in the right plays at the right times and blah blah blah. That crap doesn't matter if you're throwing a pick right after, right? So, anyway, it's just observations from a Georgia fan, and Carson needs a safety valve in this offense, and it doesn't seem like there is one. Whereas last year, Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers didn't have 1,000 yards apiece last year. I've heard a million people ask me, "What's Georgia going to do without those guys this year?" And my answer has been, there somebody else is going to get those catches and those yards. I mean, that's the reality of it. But the situational stuff is where we miss those guys. Third down, getting to the sticks, things like that. Safety valve. When things break down, throw it out wide to one of these guys. Georgia doesn't really have that. So, whereas some of those offensive stats have looked pretty good this season, it's been a rocky road. All right, let's keep going. We can get caught on Georgia all stinking day. Let's talk about this Ole Miss defense here for a minute, Mason. You kind of alluded to how good that defensive line is, and they've been really, really, really good. 41 sacks this year. Are you kidding me? That is unbelievable. First in America, 94 tackles for loss. This team's done a great job penetrating the line of scrimmage and getting back there and causing havoc. Now, not all of these stats are against SEC teams and things like that, but I mean, my gosh, man, nobody has played SEC teams all year. 41 sacks, that's crazy. 15 turnovers forced, 7 of those are interceptions. As far as turnovers forced total, that's 26th in the country. Rush yards per carry allowed 2.28, so been really, really good against the rush, and you could figure that to be the case with that defensive line that you mentioned. Um, you've kind of already alluded to it, but how do you think this defense matches up? And here's the deal: the pass yards per game allowed and the yards per pass allowed. That's what's interesting to me here, and I'm interested to see how Ole Miss plays this thing because, as you said, Carson Beck hasn't played as well under pressure. Little science fact for everyone, and look, I'm not taking up for Carson Beck because he's been bad, but every quarterback plays worse under pressure, right? Caleb Williams, any Heisman winner you want to look at, if you can get pressure on them, they're not gonna play as good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does Ole Miss bring pressure in this game and allow Georgia to run their routes and things like that? This hasn't been the best, secondary situation. So I would imagine the game plan probably stays the same. You don't want to give Carson Beck a bunch of time to sit back there and throw into the secondary that's been somewhat porous. You think they're bringing the heat this weekend?
I think so. I think Pete Golden at first is going to see what they can do with rushing 4 and dropping back. See if they can apply some pressure there at first. Now, I don't think that that's going to work against this offensive line. It hasn't been a perfect year for that unit for sure for Georgia, but they have been pretty good in passing situations. And I don't feel like, as good as Ole Miss's defensive line has been, I don't think that they're going to be able to just rush 4 all game and shut Georgia out or anything like that. So at some point you will see some different packages and whatnot, but I think initially the game plan has to be, don't let them beat us over the top. Now the question is, can Georgia capitalize on that and run the football in a light box? That's a big question to me because if Ole Miss is rushing 4 and they're stopping the run against Georgia, it's going to be a long day for Georgia. Even though they haven't been running the football all that well all season, they need something in this football game to allow them to have a balanced attack and open things up down the field. This is a matchup between the Georgia offense and the Ole Miss defense that is really good on bad and good on bad. I mean, Ole Miss has been really good at stopping the run all season long. Georgia has not been great at stopping the run. And Ole Miss has been pretty porous in the secondary. Georgia's been really good at passing the football. So how do these teams want to handle that? It's honestly a huge question mark for this game, and this side of the football will probably decide the football game because we don't know. I think you can get really creative as a coordinator in this situation because your deficiencies on both sides of the football. What you could attack, but do you want to keep the other defense? Does Georgia want to keep this defense, guessing essentially and run the football more when they give them the light box? And can Carson check down from a running attack when he notices that the box is a little bit more full, or if he can catch some linebackers tiptoeing to the line and throw it over the middle of the field? This is where the chess game is going to be really interesting between the Georgia offense and this Ole Miss defense. I think more so than the other side of the football here.
Yeah, I think you're right for sure. All right, let's talk about this Ole Miss offense, and it's been a really good one, specifically passing the football this season. Um, it'll be interesting to see what's up with Trey Harris, right? Does he play? What's his status? Is he 100%? If he does play, they've got some options behind him though. Caden Lee's been really good. Jordan Watkins has been really good. Juice Wells as very similar stats to Jordan Watkins. I think 23 receptions for him, a few less yards or whatnot. Jordan Watkins played really well last week. Caden Lee is a guy that I've been kind of paying attention to this year because he's a Georgia boy himself. He's a Kennesaw, Georgia native, and a young fella that's really kind of bust onto the scene there in that Lane Kiffin offense. But the straw that stirs this drink is obviously Jackson Dart. 3,210 yards already this season. Um, that there was years as a Georgia fan where I just begged for one of our quarterbacks to get over 3,000 yards for the season. This guy's already at 3,210. I threw for 500 last week. It seems like the offense is, for the most part, well oiled. But then again, they played Arkansas, who turned the ball over a couple times last week and provided them with some, provided them with some short fields and momentum. And then Ole Miss took care of the rest. Right, it was an absolute onslaught. But you can see some of the passing stats there, pretty much first or second in every passing category that you want to look at. Not only are they efficient passing the ball, they're explosive as well. Over 120 plays of 10 plus yards passing this season. That is incredible, and somehow that's second in America. But 120 plays of 10 plus yards. That is absolutely incredible. And you can kind of see where the bulk of their yardage comes from. Yards per pass, 11.2, 377 yards per game is really, really outstanding stuff. And they're going to be matched up against a really good defense. Here's my question, Mason. You can't be a one-trick pony against this Georgia defense. Not typically, unless you just have NFL wide receivers on each side and an NFL quarterback. And as much as I like Jackson Dart, I don't know that is necessarily this situation. So my point was saying all that is, and I'm not trying to demean the Ole Miss offense as it's done everything that it's needed to do this season for the most part, minus I guess the Kentucky game. Um, how are they gonna be able to run the ball and kind of throw any kind of change up here? That's kind of my concern and question. Um, and beyond that, I'll go ahead and flip to the next slide. This is a matchup that I'm really concerned with here as well for Ole Miss. Mason is this Georgia defensive line versus this offensive line for Ole Miss, and this kind of ties into the rush game. It ties into pass protection, all that stuff. We've got some guys that Caleb Warren didn't start last week, right? So you had a Reese McIntyre, and I don't know. I don't know who's playing this week and who's not. I know Nate Kalepo was hurt, so you had somebody stepping up in his spot. I think it was Jerquan Scott was the guy that stepped up in his spot. So this hasn't been the best offensive line group in the country this season. Allowed 19 sacks so far. Allowed 49 tackles for loss. The both of those are 82nd, 83rd in the country there. And then on top of that, you've got some injuries here. And on across the line of scrimmage from them is going to be a Georgia defensive line group that I really feel like has came into its own really over the last 3 weeks or so, as far as getting healthy and really kind of coming into their own and playing some dominant football, really for the first time this season. I think over the last 3-4 weeks, and boy, they just look really dominant, right? So where's the changeup going to come from this Ole Miss offense? We know they like to throw the football, but if you think you're just going to just throw all game and not have some type of off speed to throw at this Georgia defense, it's going to be tough to to move the ball on them. And the Parrish, the running back, from what I understand, he's hurt.
Hmm.
So and there's another running back hurt behind him, and so it was already a thin room. That's my biggest question. How's this offense going to move against this Georgia defense? And we'll kind of talk about the defense here for Georgia incorporated with this conversation. But How do you think the Georgia defense matches up against this offense, and then I guess more specifically the D line against this O line?
Yeah, well, this is where you're kind of seeing good on good more so. On this side of the football, I think that this is going to be a little bit more of a standard game plan for both teams, really, except for the fact that, like you said, Ole Miss is going to be without Henry Parrish in this football game. So, what kind of running attack do they get now? Jackson Dart is a capable runner with his legs. He can scramble and get some first downs and things like that with his legs. So maybe you incorporate a little bit more quarterback draw in this football game without having your star running back. But I don't really know that you were ever going to run the football all that effectively against this Georgia front with your offensive line being as poor as they've been all year. That this unit is not good. It's the worst unit on the field on either side of the football. Is this offensive line for Ole Miss? That's what concerns me for Ole Miss in this football game. We saw Georgia just absolutely open up a can of whoop ass against Texas, and we think Texas is a pretty good offensive line. Now, since that game, they haven't looked as good. But going into that football game, we were saying that was one of the best offensive lines in the country, if not the best. So, given that and the fact that Georgia didn't play the same game against Florida, they were much more conservative on defense. I think that they were saving some of those packages for this football game, knowing that Ole Miss would be a tougher challenge. And can Georgia take advantage of this weak offensive line for Ole Miss? I tend to think that they will. And if that's the case, are they getting to the quarterback, or is he escaping and running free and getting first downs and things like that with his legs? We're going to have to see, and really on both quarterbacks, there's going to be a lot of pressure on them just throughout the game and in general to win the team to win the football game for their team. I'm concerned with Jackson Dart in this football game, especially if he doesn't have a Trey Harris to throw to. It doesn't seem like Juice Wells is really like that guy that he once was. I think he's a capable piece and a great wide receiver 3, but if you don't have Trey Harris, does Caden Lee step up and be that number one? You got an NFL tight end and pre-scoring, is what's his effectiveness in this football game? We haven't seen tight ends be all that effective against Georgia in years past, but maybe this is a game where one of them goes off for 100 yards or so. Make no mistake, this is a really good offense for Ole Miss. We saw them just absolutely pick apart the defense of Arkansas, but I think Georgia has a much better secondary than Arkansas does. I think they're better when they're healthy up front than Arkansas. They definitely have better linebackers than Arkansas. So totally different unit here. Nobody's expecting Jackson Dart to throw for 500 yards in this football game or anything like that anyways. But what do we see out of the Ole Miss offense? Does it look more like it did against a good defense in South Carolina, where they scored? It was only 27 points that they scored, but their defense held up and held South Carolina to 3 points. Or do we see the offense for Ole Miss look more like they did against Kentucky, who's another good defense, and they really struggled in that football game? Obviously, lost in the football game, but that offense for Ole Miss really struggled there. So I'm anxious to see. I think both of these teams are tested. Georgia more tested on the road, I think, than Ole Miss. At this point in the season, I feel like this game is a toss-up. I mean, I really do. I think Ole Miss has an advantage with this being at home. Georgia is going to have a clearer path to get to the quarterback, I think, than Ole Miss will in this football game. And I think that could ultimately decide it. It's this side of the football for Georgia and their ability to get up for these types of football games. Anxious to see what sort of packages they have, though, when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think Georgia defensively has just got this huge advantage at the linebacker position, right? That you're not Ole Miss will not have seen a linebacker group quite like this one. Especially the healthier this team gets, it's really pretty sick, honestly.
Well, and CJ Allen just played probably his best game of his career against Florida, so he's getting better.
He's figuring it out. And what I love so much about CJ Allen, and I think what Kirby loves so much about him, he's got Roquan-esque speed from sideline to sideline, and
Absolutely.
that's something that you just can't teach that. And I think Kirby at the beginning of the season saw that with him and said, you know what, I'll take the good with the bad,
Hmm.
and I'll fix the bad right over time. And CJ Allen's going to be a first round pick eventually, and I'm confident in that. It's just he's got to build up more of that awareness. He's not the field general that Roquan Smith was. Roquan Smith knew what was happening before the snap a lot of times, and that's the piece that's missing with CJ Allen. And I think that Kirby is going to be able to teach him that part, and he's got all the God given ability. But and hence why Jamon Dumas Johnson decided to take off to Lexington, right? And probably saw that for himself, I would imagine. Um,
Well, and
yes,
I think while we're just talking about the Georgia linebacker group, this is a unit that's excelling and doing really well this season without a first round draft pick in Smile London as well. I think people, Georgia fans included, are kind of forgetting that this guy's been out since the Alabama game, and he will be back at some point this year, and that's going to boost this defense even more because, I mean, he's got all the experience and the God given talent that plays a different style. But you talk about a linebacker in pass protection. I don't know that there's anybody better in the country than Smile London in his ability to read offenses and all that as well. So. He won't be ready for this game, but at some point this year, maybe it may take he may not come back till the playoffs or conference championship or something like that. But at some point, Georgia's getting a boost as well in that linebacker room.
yeah, it seems like the Georgia defense has gotten deeper as the seasons went on, which is weird. And
Yeah.
more guys have been able to get experience, and that's helped as well. There's been a couple of times this season where there's been defenders on the field that I didn't even know who the hell they were. So there's been some experience to be had and gained, and this group seems to be getting deeper as the season goes on. What's your prediction here, Mason? I'll just tell you right now. You know, this game was lopsided last year, and it was at Georgia. And while I don't think that Georgia has got the firepower to put up 52 on this Ole Miss defense that I feel like is much improved since last season, I don't see where Ole Miss has made enough improvements for me to be able to take their side on this one and pick Ole Miss to win this football game. I think Georgia is probably still a touchdown better than Ole Miss at this point, even at their place. It's all going to depend on Carson Beck and his ability to protect the football, though, Mason. One interception is one thing. Look, Georgia has played, um, a series of games here lately where they've turned the ball over an immense amount and won these games by large margins, right? And it doesn't really it defies college football physics. I mean, and to think that Georgia can't keep playing football this way, Mason. I mean, it's going to bite you in the butt. You can't turn the ball over 3 or 4 times a game and expect to keep winning by 2 touchdowns. That's not reality. And
Yeah.
Ole Miss is not that football team, and I'm pretty confident in that. So, with all that being said, this is Ole Miss and wounded animal mode here with 2 losses already. But I think Georgia can go in here, and I think Georgia can get this win. Last I checked, Ole Miss ain't Alabama, and Georgia beats everybody that's not named Alabama.
Yeah.
And they've done so for about 4 calendar years now. There's no reason for me not to bet on Georgia. So give me Georgia, um, and I guess -2.5. Yeah, even though I think this will be a close one, I think a field goal win is pretty probable. The over under will be something that I'll probably talk about on the Thursday betting show. So y'all come join us on Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, for Between the Lines, and that's our weekly best bets show for college football betting. What's your bet on this one, dude?
Well, I've got Georgia winning as well. For all the hesitation that I had in the Texas game, I think Georgia just completely proved proved me and everybody wrong in that, and had an absolute dominant performance. And they've proved that time and time again that they get up for these football games. So until they give me a reason to bet against them, I'm not going to do it unless there's a team named Alabama that's lining up against them. So I'll just go ahead and tell you for the rest of the season, Mark, until Georgia loses a game. I'm taking Georgia to win and more than likely cover in a lot of those cases. But to me, what's most intriguing about this matchup is that, for Ole Miss, if you lose, you're out. There's no other game on your schedule that you can point to and say we deserve to be in because we beat that team. At this point, you've lost to Kentucky, you've lost to LSU, now you've lost to Georgia at home. There's no coming back from this. So if Lane Kiffin loses this football game, does he end up being the coach for the Florida Gators next season? I think that's a big question. And now, if you listen to some of the talk around the Florida program, they're pretty confident that Billy Napier is going to keep his job after this season with the work that he's done, with the injuries that they've had to sustain. There's growing belief that he's safe for this season. However, I think a lot of that has to do with who's available, who's available to hire, and if Lane Kiffin loses this football game, and they want to just kind of kick the tires on that, and he agrees to something, I think that's a situation where you could see Florida kind of go ahead and make that change, even though they feel okay with Billy Napier at the moment. If you got Lane Kiffin, who's been their guy for the entire season, I mean, even the preseason, it seems like Florida has kind of had Lane Kiffin in their crosshairs. What could happen there? You know what I mean? That if he does lose his football game, if he wins, well then, if Lane Kiffin wins this football game, and Ole Miss, wins, I think that they're in the college football playoff, and there's no real talks going on for months because they're going to be playing pretty much through the month of December. So I don't see it happening if Lane Kiffin's able to pull this one out. So to me, there's more riding on this than just this season. Is kind of the point I'm getting at here.
Yeah, and look at this mess that's going on here in the SEC, Mason. I mean, you've got Georgia, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Texas, LSU, all with one loss in the conference. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, it doesn't even seem like this would be possible. Now, it's going to be impossible for it to end this way because Texas and Texas A&M are going to play each other in the last game of the season. Georgia and Tennessee are going to play each other next week, and Georgia and Ole Miss are playing this weekend. So Georgia has a chance, definitely over the next two games, to catch an L. There's no doubt about that. This week, as I said, is on the road and then going to host in Athens the Tennessee Volunteers. So really, Mason, I think what it's boiling down to in the SEC here is, and I think you're right. Obviously, Ole Miss wins this game. I think they go to the playoff. And Georgia, if they lose this game, then they got to turn around and win the next one against Tennessee and ruin their season. And then that would really make the picture clearer. But we both predicted Georgia to win this one. So what I think is going to end up happening is that Texas A&M game, the winner of that's going to go to the SEC championship, and and Georgia Tennessee game. I think the winner of that game is going to have the inside track to go to the SEC championship as well. But we all have to remember that Tennessee, if they were to win that game there in Athens, they've still got to beat Vanderbilt at the end of the season, and that game is going to have a ton of pressure. Let's think about this too, guys. What if Georgia beats Tennessee? Tennessee's got two losses, and then they've got to play Vanderbilt at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And then Vanderbilt has got Tennessee up against the wall, possibly knocking them out of the college football playoff. We've got some really interesting SEC matchups that are coming up, and this league has beat each other up, man. There's really good teams in this league. Some real good offenses, some real good defenses. I would say more better defenses than offenses this year, but good group of teams. They're beating each other up. It's going to be a really entertaining last few weeks here in the SEC as we get ready to go into December.